Introduce our first two speakers. We actually have a two-part session for deploying Office 365 ProPlus like a pro, and we happen to have two pros here available for us. So big thanks to Gary and Mike for offering to come out and present today. We really appreciate your time, and I'll hand it over to you guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg. So I'm Gary. I currently work for Wells Fargo Bank full-time and then part-time at Recast Software, where you might have seen some of my blog posting. So at Wells Fargo, Mike and I work together. We spend a lot of our time on our in-place upgrades for Windows 10, but we recently got pulled into deployment of Office, Microsoft 365. So that is where we have come up with a lot of this content. And for me, follow me on Twitter. A lot of stuff might not be necessarily a surprise because I get excited and I like to post a lot of stuff on Twitter as I'm working, partially just because I like to document part of it, and Twitter seems like a great place for documentation. So feel free to follow me there, and then also make sure you hit up the user voices as we tweet those.
Yeah, and my name is Mike Terrell. Work with Gary, as he said. I also run the Arizona Systems Management User Group in Phoenix. Been doing so since 2006. But yeah, I think my focus is obviously always deployment and any type of content distribution and restrictive networks, that kind of thing too. That all ties into play. So it's gonna tie nicely into what we were drug into with this whole Office thing. Well, it's not technically Office anymore, but we'll get into that here. So I think, Gary, you want to take over screen control?
Yeah, and if you noticed, my barber shop has been closed, so my hair is much longer than my profile picture, which I'm not happy about.
I'm getting shaggy too. Mike's looking pretty good, but I'm pretty shaggy too.
You guys need to come to my barber shop.
Yeah. Do a side gig, Mike.
All right. You guys can see the presentation up?
Yes.
Yep, looks good.
All right. Excellent. All right. And let's see if I can. All right. So deploying Office 365 ProPlus like a pro. A couple months ago, not even 2 full months ago, our corporation decided that we were going to start moving towards Office 365 off of 2016, and they came to us because of their initial plans weren't going so well. A lot of user frustration, so they came to Mike and I and asked how we would do it. So we put some of our other assignments aside and started digging into Office 365. I hadn't touched Office 365 previously, and the blog posts I found were from 2015 that Mike wrote. So it's been a little while since he had dug into it. And so this presentation is going through our last 2 months of intensive Office 365 research and development and how we are moving ahead with that. So deploying Office 365 like a pro, or as we came to find out as we were building everything, Microsoft 365 for Enterprise, and then some other changes just the other day to throw yet more wrenches into this.
Yeah, so for the agenda, we're going to definitely define our goals. I always like to start projects off by defining what we're going to be doing, because otherwise, why are we doing it in the first place? And we always like to keep things very kind of modular for anybody that's followed our WAS process. It's very Lego-like. You can snap in different modules, use them like you want to use them, whatnot. So we're going to break this down into multiple parts. So that's going to be install script, which is kind of the brains behind everything. And then the various applications and deployments. And then we had a request for toast notifications like we do for our in-place upgrade process as well. So we decided to tie that in also. So like with everything, we want a consistent, reusable installation method that we can use to upgrade from Office 2016 or even just perform a fresh install. And we're actually calling it Microsoft 365 Office because if we took the Office out of the name, I think that would really confuse our end users, let alone our technical staff. So you'll see our naming. We've kind of hybrid what Microsoft has come up with that we think kind of makes sense and whatnot. But this needs to be able to happen on our corporate network, but also our VPN network. And currently, we don't have the ability to use the CDN or CMG. So we're kind of restricted that way. And we do have a significant amount of users on VPN, I'm sure as most of you do as well. We had some other things that we needed to take care of, like old barnacles, as Brian would call them, things that the ODT setup engine doesn't remove, right? We need to be able to replace access if they had access, or project or Visio. Like, we can't just upgrade them and then expect them to go out to get access or project or Visio and get the correct version too. So we had another mandate that kind of slipped in late in the game to be able to, if they had Project Pro, we needed to replace Project Pro. If they had Project Standard, we needed to be able to replace Project Standard. And then for those of you that have played with Office 365 and the config wizard, it's all XML driven, right? So we want to kind of avoid the XML hell, as we call it, right? We don't want to have too many of these XML files.
Right. And for the process, we wanted to provide a pleasant user experience. The first time that our deployment team sent me the Office 365 that they came up with, I clicked install. Over VPN, I waited literally 4 hours for it to download and then start installing. And then during that time, when I clicked install, I had time, but by the time I started installing, I was in meetings. So then it closed my apps and I lost my meeting that I was in. So then I had to dial in and explain what happened. So we wanted to prevent that. We wanted to give the user the experience of when they click install, it installs. We wanted to provide custom notifications so that they would have a better understanding of what's going to be happening. And we wanted them to have the ability to be notified when the install was actually available. Currently, it would show up in Software Center and you would click install, but you'd have to wait. We didn't want to have them to wait at all. We wanted instant install. And then we also had the problem with previous versions where if you went to install Visio or Project after Office, it required yet another huge, large download. And we wanted to prevent that, so that when if they had Office and they went to install Project or Visio, it was also instantaneously installing.
Yeah, and since we're not able to leverage the CDN, we need the installs to be able to be kept current, right? The source content needs to be kept fresh. We currently do that for our Windows servicing. So we already had a process in place where we service the media with OSD Builder, and then that gets replaced typically on the third Tuesday of the month, so a week after Patch Tuesday, if everything's well. So we basically needed to adopt the same methodology for this. Is the Office updates come down on a monthly schedule and be able to freshen that, keep that content fresh.
Right. Other requirements that were given us is having the ability to do both self-service for parts of the organization and other parts just doing force required deployments, and to providing the best user experience in both of those as well. Our organization, one of our goals moving forward is more self-service. In the past, we have been very requirement-based deployments because IT knows best and what would the end user know. And but they are learning that end users are in this age of smartphones and app stores are getting used to self-service, and we're trying to adopt that as much as possible now. So they wanted to be able to provide experiences for both of those scenarios.
We also wanted to be able to use native solutions where possible, right? I think we've got a lot of deployments out there that use PADT, but Microsoft's actually done a great job on taking feedback from the community through user voice and enabling those features. So if you stayed current with MemCM, you've got a lot of those features, and it's just a matter of turning them on and using them. So like there's a grace period now at the deadline that you can enable, which probably a lot of people don't know unless they're sifting through, each of the release notes. But we wanted to stick with the out of the box solution. And then where we found that there were gaps, we either wanted to create user voice items for those gaps or see if there were user voice items already that were out there that we ran into. And for those of you that follow me on Twitter, I tweeted out, I think, about 8 of them that are going to tie nicely into this presentation. So please go vote for those and also retweet them for us.
And then lastly, after we built everything, we were told that we also had to support an additional language for our requirements. We have some branches in Canada that require having the French language. So we had to then kind of go back and figure out how we were going to do languages with the least amount of impact. We didn't want to impact everybody that doesn't need a language. So how to keep that separate and still provide a good user experience.
So we went through several iterations, and I'd probably say that we're still iterating, but I think we're close to our near final release that we'll be able to hand off. But we learned a lot of lessons along the way, and we're working on this slide last night, and we originally called it failures along the way, but they weren't really failures. It was just like, hey, we got an idea on how we can approach this. Let's use this particular solution, right? So for those of you that are pay close attention to the way content works in CM, any app DT has a unique content GUID, and that content GUID is going to change every time it gets updated. Well, we want to keep the content fresh monthly. That means that content GUID's going to change. And so we started looking at packages, because package actually maintains a history between versions, and that seemed like a great solution, right? So it's single content. You can have as many programs as possible, and we thought, yep, that's awesome. That's the way to go. But as most of you know, there are no icons in Software Center, so your Software Center looks very dodgy if you've got a lot of package programs that are in there. And we didn't want that, because we wanted to provide a good user experience, and we want to encourage people to click these links and not make them think twice that it's some kind of phishing scheme inside Software Center, right? The other thing is there's no links or deep links that you can provide to package programs. So we wanted to be able to leverage a toast and put a link in there that just opens it up, and that's not possible. And then there is no detection method. So we have some things that require detection methods, and we don't really get that with a package.
So then we also looked at using task sequences. Mike and I live in a task sequence driven world. We know about it. If you looked at our blogs, we have a lot of content around task sequences, and we know how to manipulate a task sequence to typically get exactly what we want. So in this case, we're like, well, let's use a task sequence, because then we have a huge amount of flexibility. They wanted potentially to add some reboots into the situation, so we could accommodate all of the deployment methods possible inside of a task sequence. But then it came back to some of the other requirements where they want the beautiful user experience in the Software Center, and we still can't provide the icon in the Software Center, and there isn't, same with the package, there's not a way to link it directly to it. And then so we thought in the newer versions of Config Manager, you can actually use a task sequence inside of an application. So we actually spent a little bit of time. We created an application. We created an app DT that uses a task sequence, and then used the package inside of that. And then trying to follow the app detection log to the task sequence log to the logs for the package installs. It just became this jumbled mess, and it still didn't provide the experience that we were hoping. You had to check different boxes to like allow users to experience if you wanted the user to actually see the install, which is what we wanted, so that they could actually see what was going on. You had to do some other things, and in the end, it just didn't seem like the best way to go.
It seemed like a lot of baling wire and duct tape, actually. So apps, that's what we're kind of left with, right? So the cons, and we'll start with those, is like I previously mentioned, that every app DT has its own content. So if the Office payload pretty much shares the same content across the board, depending upon how you build your download XML file, right? So your package for Visio and the Office install is going to be pretty much the same. But if you have two different apps for that, now we're talking 2.5 gig and 2.5 gig, and then another 2.5 gig for project, and then it's just a mess when it comes to managing that type of content, unless you're on really fast links and you really don't care, because it's never been an issue for you. Also, there's no way to really reuse that content that's been cached. So if you're using CM Peer Cache or legacy third-party peer-to-peer solutions, it's going to see this content ID as being completely separate from the other content ID, and it's not going to have any rhyme or reason to match those two or reuse that particular cache. Now, branch cache, on the other hand, doesn't have those issues because it doesn't look at things at the package level or the content ID level. It looks at it at the file block level. But we wanted something that would accommodate, all different types of use cases.
The pros for the application model, icons. We really wanted to make this look polished and professional. When you go to even like the App Store on your phone and you look for an application and it has an ugly icon, you just kind of push it aside and move along. If you look for something and there's 4 apps that do the same thing, oftentimes even the simple thing as the icon kind of sway your opinion. So we wanted to make sure that everything looked professional, it looked nice, and that they could tell we put time and effort into providing a good user experience. The direct link capability was also crucial for us. Being able to have a link in the emails that are being sent out through communications, and then through the toast notification, when you click get started, it would actually launch Software Center right to the Office installation app. That was a huge win for us and with our marketing / communication group. And then the detection method. We need to be able to confirm the channel that the Office was on, and so that we can then be able to change the channel or confirm which channels are installed. So we needed to be able to have detection methods on the applications. And then the requirements on applications, it allows us to have a different app DT for the different languages. Without being able to set requirements, we'd have to actually create completely different applications for the different languages. This way we can have one application for Office, deploy it to everyone, and the requirements set what language actually gets added or installed. So where did we land on how to deploy this?
Yeah, so we decided, since we love task sequences so much, we would do it with a task sequence.
Oh, that's our failure at humor at this time of the day. So we actually did go with the app model. And if you've been following us on Twitter, you would have seen our images of all the different applications that we've come up with. Okay. All right, so the basics of the applications. We have one application that is named our 365 content application. And inside of that, we've got our 365 content app DT. The app DT is the content for that is the actual installer for Office. and then the install method is just copying it to a predefined location on the computer. And we'll go into this in our demos. This is just an overview of how it works. And then we have our main Office application for in this case, the semi-annual enterprise channel. And so under that application, we have the 365 app deployment type. The app deployment type gets triggered. So one other thing, the reason that in this demo, I have the 365 content app showing up first is because we pre-deploy this application with the content to the people that are going to have Office available, so that the content is already on those machines in that predefined location. And then we'll see the application show up in their software center, so they can go ahead and click on it, which launches the app DT, which then the app DT has a dependency of the 365 content app. So it first checks to make sure that the content app is installed. If it's not, it would actually go and install it at that point. But we've pre-deployed that, so the app is already there. So the content for Office is there. And then the app DT, once it's confirmed the content is there, triggers the install. Now for the additional languages, it's similar scenario. The 365 content application has already been deployed to these machines. So the 2.5 gig payload is already there. The user would go in and click the Office, which then would launch the non-English version of the application DT based upon the requirements of that machine. At that point, it would actually check for a different application. We have a 365 language content app, which has the content for that specific application. So in our case, we're using French. So when they trigger off Office, it will check that machine, see that it's running the French language. It then runs the French language app DT, which has a dependency of the French language content application. The French language content application has a dependency of the actual Office 365 content. So it makes sure then all the content is available. And once it knows all the content is available, it triggers off the installation of Office 365 with the additional language support. And then after that goes, we have a happy user because it all triggered instantaneously. All right. 37. I think we were planning to talk slower, Mike. Do we want to cut into some demos now?
Yeah, let's carry on. We didn't really rehearse this, so we will just shift in here. And
all right.
I think I need to steal your screen, huh?
Yep.
All right, let's see. What would that be? Screen number 3, I think. All right, so you guys see my screen? Take it.
Right.
To get in here. So there was a question that came up was, why not just pre-deploy this? Well, if you look back at some of our requirements, the first thing was we needed to support multiple types of distributions. We're really focusing, or at least trying to push the business in the direction of user self-service. It's one of our strategic initiatives, and we wanted to be able to get that content out ahead of time. But the problem is, and there's a user voice that I tweeted out this morning, is there's a nice little pre-deploy checkbox on the deployment that you can pre-deploy it to a user's primary device. But it only works for required deployments, and we didn't want this to be a required deployment. I don't like things being forced on me, and a lot of users are already used to using the App Store and everything else. So we wanted to be able to promote this self-service time period, and then have the deployment team just go do cleanup on the machines that haven't upgraded, later in the year, basically. So that's kind of the way we came up with that. Now, if we look at the content, this is just content is what it is, right? So if we look at the package source here, we have this split up like this, and this is just that we haven't renamed the directories yet. Unfortunately, that's one thing we didn't get to, but we just call it the content itself. And what you're going to see is the setup engine from the Office Deployment Toolkit, which I think Gary tweeted out a little joke the other day. Is it going to be renamed to the to MDT because it's now Microsoft 365? Okay, that's a bad joke. Maybe like anybody's laughing. Hopefully, Niehaus didn't hear that. So we include that, and we include the script, which I'm not going to go into the script yet because that would steal Gary's thunder. But this is where a lot of our heavy lifting is, and this just looks like the content that you download from Microsoft. Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And we see that this actually, the size of this, I think it went down a little bit because we were using a slightly different channel. It's now 2.36 gig in size. So that's big, right? And I recently had to look into an issue where one of our, I think, senior managers, they were trying to download Visio or Project, the 2016 version of it, and it was taking forever. And I had to stop what I was doing, pull logs, looking to see why and it's like, no, it's because they kicked it off. It wasn't cached already, and it's not on any peers or this or that kind of thing. So that's what we want to avoid. We want to kind of single instance this as best as we can, right? So having done this all these years, I never had the thought to actually create a content package and make it as a dependent for all these other packages, right? That just was one of those light bulb moments that went off, and I'm like, hey, Gary, we should try this. This might actually get us to what we're doing, right? Because the installs are pretty simple. They're all driven by the XML file, which those are tiny, right? So that's our main content package, and there's nothing really fancy to it other than it calls that PowerShell script that you see in there. And I'll get into the deployments. I think we get into those a little bit later, and we'll actually see how the deployments are set up. But we do have a detection method in here. And this is where we've changed it up a little bit. We were originally using a custom script. This is great. The custom script is awesome. PowerShell is awesome. We love PowerShell. But what we ran into was we wanted to do a detection on two things. We stage it to a certain directory location in program data, which we actually do a hard link, so we're not duplicating cache space. But we wanted to check to see that it's in program data, but we also wanted to check to see that the content's been cached. So we actually do a little reaching into WMI and to see there's a flag that we can tell if it's been fully cached or not cached, because we use those as triggers later on to make things magically appear in Software Center and have the toast notification magically appear. The problem that actually Mr. Block found was when this was deployed to a device, worked fine. When it was deployed to a user that was an admin, it worked fine. When it was deployed to a user who's just a user, it failed miserably, because after confirming with Microsoft, this actually runs in the user context when it's targeted to a user. Now, that's one of the user voice items that I tweeted out as well, that we want a little checkbox here that says run this script as user. And we always want the default to run as admin, because where we're looking at in WMI for the cache percentage, it doesn't, it's not, a standard user can't actually see that. So, and then, yeah, this is just the basic kind of the defaults from here. And the program, yeah, I already kind of went over the program for that. So, so that's that's the cornerstone. That's the main application per se. So if we look at, and we're still trying to get used to some of these new names, semi-annual enterprise channel is what used to be semi-annual channel. there's a blog, and we got a bunch of links at the end of the presentation, which will be made available, where you can go and review what the new names are. They've introduced some new channels. They've renamed a bunch of things, and it really causes a lot of havoc, especially around automations. If you have automation on this, then yeah, you're gonna have to retool some of it probably. But this is our main Office app, and like I said, we've kind of done a hybrid here because we still have Office in the name. If we just said Microsoft 365, what was it, for Enterprise, lowercase e, I think they maybe had an intern do that. Dash semi-annual enterprise channel. A normal user, let alone a technician, is not going to know what that is. So we at least kept Office in the name here. Obviously, feel free to do what you want, but we're trying to at least adopt the new naming and the new channels names as best as possible out of the gate, so that we don't change things up, a month or two down the road. Since this is intended to not only be used for new installations, but also upgrade existing ones, our environment's very much like, well, you got to give the users a warning, right? You got to give them plenty of warning. You can't just close things down and whatever, right? And so we put some of that information in here. We'll probably still fill out some links. We've got our fancy little Office icon, which we love, and I think I saw somebody tweeted out a GitHub link to an icon library. So if you're not good at doing Bing searches for these icons, there's a GitHub repository full of them. So that kind of gets us what we want, and we like that. Now, in terms of the deployment type for this particular application, we see that it's also script-based, right? So this content actually refers to a slightly different location, right? So yeah, that's funny. I knew you guys would like that comment. So we have what we've broken down to the installer's content, right? And if we take a look at what's in installers, if anybody wants to have a guess, it's a total of 53.6K. All right, so a user waiting for a 53.6K download, that's not very big. And I think Ryan just had to have a new machine sent to him, our colleague who's on the chat there. I think his Office experience was great, right? So we look there, and it's just it's 3 more PowerShell scripts that are tiny, right? So this is the bulk of what gets installed, and we've made these things modular with switches so that when you're calling it does what you intend it to do, basically. And Gary's going to go through that. But if we look at each of these, whether it be the semi-annual enterprise channel or Visio or whatever, we've got a nice little switch in here that tells us what channel we want, and we do some customizations to the script. Gary does a great job of making all this stuff available on his blogs, and we don't want to give away any company stuff, so with company things embedded in it. Although I've heard people deploy some of his some of the scripts just as is without changing the company name, and then their employees wonder why all of a sudden they're seeing stuff from Garytown. That's kind of funny. So, but we like to make it modular, right? So we want to be able to present this solution, and we can see that this is going to install the broad channel. Now we haven't switched this name yet, so this one becomes semi-annual, or will become semi-annual after June 9th, which we have in the link. But don't try to use that now because you'll get very mixed results and bad things will happen with the current Office deployment tool. So, and then for detection method on this one, we're just looking at the CDN base URL. We do have support for monthly and semi-annual enterprise channel preview, which is a mouthful. We're looking at specific versions there, so that if a user needs to be able to flip to monthly or the preview channel, they can do so easily as well and not have to sit through another 2+ gig type download. So that's how that works. User experience, we want it to be normal. I think the Office team has done a phenomenal job at the end user experience, not just for the actual upgrades, but also for the deploying the software updates. If you're leveraging the in the ribbon updates available, I just ran through it the other day. It was great. It notified me. I clicked it. It closed my Office apps really quickly. It patched. It reopened them back up, and I was back up and running in like 2 minutes. Versus our traditional way of the way that we do software updates at work, it's like everything's a reboot, and which is a very long process by the time we go through our pre-boot authentication and VPN back in and all that stuff. It's a big headache. So to me, the end user experience the Office team has done has been really good, and we'll actually see some of it kick off here in a bit. But we want to be able to make sure that that's visible, right? And this will work if it's a completely, required deployment where it's going to a machine that, like we have call centers, they don't want to see any deployments. Those go at nighttime, and this will work for that scenario as well. So, what else? Yeah, so if we look at this monthly enterprise channel just real quick, actually I'll just go right into the DT. We'll see the program, and this is going to do channel monthly, so that's where the change is there. And if we look at access,
just one note, it's actually monthly enterprise now. You just haven't updated your program line.
Yeah, no, I'm staying with the old stuff, so I don't break anything yet.
Monthly enterprise, they did make that start working when they made the announcement.
So. Oh, that's right. That one works. That's the only one that really works consistently. So this one, we have a dash access switch here. Another thing to note too, since these are the click to run, actually, let me show the Visio and the project professional ones. Since these are the click to run versions, this actually came up from a colleague of ours the other day. He saw one of these in Software Center, and he went ahead and clicked it, and he was still running the old Office 2016, and he didn't expect his Office to get completely updated. Well, since you can't really run these, at least I don't believe so, without having M365, this will actually go ahead and put M365 down as well, and we've got a Project Pro switch here too. So zoom it. Okay. I thought this would be a good resolution. If I don't know if I have zoom in on this box. Let me see 1 second. Zoom it within a Teams session is always interesting.
Right. Control.
All right, I'll try to zoom it for you. RG, let's see. There we go. And I always forget how to use zoom it, so there. Zoom or zoom it, okay. Yeah, so that's what the command line looks like. It typically, what I always like to do, because I'm getting old anyway, is I always like to just pop these out into. Gary knows I'm a big fan of Microsoft Paint and of Notepad, so
the new Wally.
Yeah, but not log files. There's a difference. I draw a line somewhere, Gary. Yeah. So there we go. So we can see what our actual command is, and these are all going to be available to people too. So don't worry about trying to take too many notes. We will have this available and consumable. Hopefully, most of it is up on Gary's GitHub already, but we're looking a way to streamline that to actually just where you click a button and answer a couple questions, and it goes off and does everything for you. So that's what that does. In terms of detection method, we're also looking for WinProj here.
We've changed that.
Did you change it?
Yeah, your collab's a little bit behind, like a week behind.
All right. So Gary changed it on me for some reason. Maybe went with the program features name. I don't know.
Well, originally we weren't supporting both Pro and Standard, and once we started supporting both Pro and
That's right.
Standard, we had to come up with a new detection.
Yeah. Yeah. So for any of you that used our CIs for our pre-assessment rules, we're a big fan of the ARP names or programs feature names, in which you do see a distinction in there for whether it's professional or standard. So yeah, good call out. This lab's a little behind. I've mostly been working in our work production environment and work lab environment, so I had to at least make sure this was somewhat running. So yeah, and other than that, these are all pretty much the same. So the nice thing about this is we shouldn't really have to bump these. So if you notice these content IDs, for anybody that hasn't paid attention, every time you come in here and you say right click and update content, this is going to generate a brand new content GUID or content ID. And that wreaks havoc on CM itself. Well, the native CM client's not very content aware. It just downloads everything, and like if you bump something like 10 times, you'll see 10 different random things in the CCM cache. If you're using CM Pure Cache, yeah, it's going to wreak havoc on that. If you're using a third-party tool, yeah, it's gonna wreak havoc on that as well. Branch cache, however, these things actually do pretty well in our initial tests, which is nice. So we're not looking at a huge delta in payload between the months even, which is great. So any tips on that? Yeah, we do have some tips on cleaning up that stuff. Probably need to publish some of our cache management stuff that we do that we're getting ready to rewrite for branch cache. So we'll try to make those available all over. So that's it for pretty much the applications. They're all like Gary said. If we do look at the that was probably one thing that I missed that's actually pretty big that ties it all together is the dependency. So this does have a dependency on the Microsoft 365 content app, and it'll automatically install it if it's not already there. But the way that we do deployments, we already get that out there ahead of time, and we don't make it visible in Software Center until the content's actually cached, and we'll cover that when we get to the actual deployment phase. So with that,
all right, I get to steal back here, and I'm going to talk about the language.
Oh, yep. Okay, go for it.
And there we go. All right, and I did hear about the zoom it, so I will make sure I do that. But on our main application here, we've got two different app DTs, one for French, which is the first app DT, and then just our standard one. So the second one has no requirements. So eventually, if we had additional languages we needed to support, they'd all come first, and then based upon the requirements, it would go through them all, and then it would fail back to English as the last one. So our requirements is I set up a little global condition where basically it's just running the get win system locale, and then it returns the value. And so if the return value starts with fr dash, I'm going to deploy the French language to these machines. And then the difference between what Mike was just showing is the dependency for our French language goes to a French content, and I'll show that here as well. The French language pack, so we've got content. I've actually renamed my lab because I sleep less than Mike, so I've gone through and updated things. So our English content, our main office is looks just like what Mike showed. It's got all the different content, and then our French language pack does not have the setup, and it only has the 4 files that are required for French. So this application then, when it runs the French app DT version of Office, it then calls the French application as a prereq. And then our French content application, as I was showing in that diagram earlier, calls the prereq of the main content. So what's going to happen is it's going to go out, grab the main content, pull that down into cache, hard link it over to our temporary cache location on the machine, and then it's going to run the French and append that data via hard link into that same cache location, so it looks like it's one cache, and then run the app DT. And so what that looks like in here. Now this program, control. Apologies, my zoom in skills are. There we go. Okay, so, and now I can't actually interact with it. So I'm just going to pull a mic here and throw it in Notepad. Long. And zoom in. All right, so here we're setting the channel. I have it set to semi-annual, which can cause some problems unless you're using the newer ODT. Temporarily, I've fixed this in the script side, so I don't have to go back and because I've already updated all my programs. And then the company value, which will plug in the company value. And once again, as Mike was saying, is we like to share what we do, and I don't want to have to go back into the script every time and modify Big Bank to something else. And then our language, I've added a couple additional switches in the last day, one for language, and then one for if they want that language as the default. So basically, I developed all the language stuff that we're doing in the last couple of days as we found out more information from our lines of businesses. And they still haven't told us if they want us to deploy the French language as the default or if they want English default with French as an add-on. So I thought I would just accommodate either request. So if they want it as an add-on, they just do -French language. But then if they want to set that as a default, I can accommodate that by adding yet another parameter, which when I get into the script, I'll talk about. Let's see.
So real quick, Gary, before you kind of continue on, there was a question that came up, and I probably should have dug into it a little bit more. Although I know we've got a block for it in the actual script. Is so the question was why use a temporary cache location? So yeah, so the M365 content app, it actually will pre-cache the content to program data, and the reason why we do it is we want a single known place to actually run the install from, something that's not going to change, right? So we always want it to be there. And the CCM cache really doesn't work too well because it fortunately kind of just assigns random characters to the cache content locations. And if we're going to be bumping the content on a monthly basis, it could be 3 this month, it could be A, the next month it could be Y, whatever. It doesn't really matter, right? It's just not known. And since there's the dependency chain there, it would be really difficult for the app DT that installs Project or Visio or semi-annual enterprise channel to know what that previous location is. And what we do is actually, and Gary will show in the script, is we don't make a copy of it to that location. We actually do a hard link to that location. So it's only on the disk one time when it's in the CCM cache. Well, it could also be in branch cache. It would be deduped in the branch cache. But it's just a hard link, which is just a pointer. And so it's really quick and it's lightweight, and we now have a known location. So that hopefully that answers your question of why we're using that methodology.
Demos. This machine was working great before I paused it yesterday. Let's see.
Too many reverts.
Probably so. Let's see if this other one's going here. So this is actually my French machine, which is what I wanted the demo on. As you can see, some of these things here are in French. So this one's actually the French language. So let's see if this is going to love me this time or not. Come on. There we go. Okay, so 3 components. It's got the app. It's got the app itself, and it's got the main content, and then it's got the content for the language pack. And as you saw, it populated this, and then it populated this from the different caches. So let me pull up good old CM trace. As you can see, in that command line, I told it to actually default to the French language, which is why then you see the actual Office install going in French here. And I like to build a lot of logging into everything I do because I typically end up making a mistake somewhere along the line, and having the logs available really helps with that. So this log is Office 365 install log. Now the red you can just ignore. It's not a failure. For whatever reason, CM Trace is picking up this as red. But so what happens here is it started the pre-cache application. It realized because of that pre-cache line that we had that this was going to run the section for pre-cache. So what it does is it copies. I need to rename this, starting a hard link of the media from CCM cache to the cache location. And here it is, it's linking the files. And then it ran over and saw, oh, it needs to add the French content because we're running the French DT. So then it goes and appends these different CAV files and DAT files into there. And then now it's starting the actual install. So at this point, it detected that we had the French language picked and that it needs to be run as default. So it appends that into the XML, and then it's creating the actual configuration XML on the fly, and then it starts the process. We have an Office prep script as well, which we actually got parts of it from one of the user members from TC Smug. When I went to a meeting a couple months ago, a person mentioned it. So it's like, oh, that's a great idea. And instead of using the scrubber, which is just this awful long VBS overly complicated script, we were able to do more precision scalpel removing of the barnacles that were in our environment before kicking off the upgrade. So we let the upgrade remove as much as possible using the native functionality, but if there were a couple of different items that were installed that prevented it from upgrading that the Office installer natively didn't take care of, that is what our Office prep was used for. So this is still running, and this will return shortly, and then I'll show you the XML that got created. So before the application started, you saw that it had the setup and the Office folder here. And then it created the configuration file with the installer script because of so many different variations that we didn't want to have to create an XML file for each different option that we had to install for. So on the fly, we build this file. So it grabs the channel information that was listed in your command line. It set French to the primary language. And then let's see here, view. It's in our environment, we're also excluding these different apps. So you would need to then change that in the script. But then we also want to make sure English is installed. Most of those users will end up using English most of the time anyway, that we have French going to. And then the company value, which we specified in the script program line, it also shows up here. So this script then is generated, or this XML is generated at the time of the install based upon all those parameters passed. That way we don't actually have, we have no XML files in any of our content that you saw. It's all generated at the install time. And we'll go into the script after our break to explain how the script actually works. Let's see. I think we're coming up on break time, right? Is that right, Mike and Greg?
If this works well for you, yeah, we can definitely do break now. You want to do that?
Yeah.
So we have plan is a 15-minute break, and then you guys have an hour after that.
Yeah, that'll work.
Okay. Let me share my screen here. If you're ready, I'll go ahead and share screen. And
oh, here it just finished installing. I'll go ahead and show the finished French. Oh, of course, now it's gonna make me look like a liar. Options and language. So it's got French as a default. And I've run into this in the past because I'm not actually licensed. It doesn't do everything quite right. But oh, and then if I do this. So that's another thing that's working in a lab that makes life a little more difficult for testing is when you don't have everything licensed. But so there's your French version. It's installed and ready to go. All right, go ahead, Greg. You can steal back.
All right, thanks, Gary. All right, let me share a screen real quick here and cover a couple things before we take our break. I did see a few questions, and I'll send those to Gary and Mike during the break, and we can see how those fit into the second half of the session. Most you guys covered almost all of them, but I saw a couple there we might want to bring up. Yeah, break here. We're going to take a 15-minute break. I'll put a little timer up here in just a second. Please take our survey while we're on the break. I'll throw it in the chat here in just a minute. If you grab it off the screen, it is case sensitive, so you'll have to make those caps in there. And I mentioned earlier, right, if you have random questions, add those. There's basically a free text slot on the survey, but this will help us steer the MVP and Friends roundtable that we're going to have over lunchtime. So we'll take 15 minutes now and then catch you guys back here in a few. Thanks.